we're going to be looking at some of the different technologies that the Navy has arranged for this inventor, Salvador Cesar Paez, to have published through the Patents Office. So who is Salvador Cesar Paez? In 1999, he got his PhD from Case Western Reserve University. Then he began to work as a general engineer and advanced concepts analyst with Northrop Grumman. And that began immediately after he got his PhD. So for a few years, he was with Northrop Grumman. And the important thing is Northrop Grumman, they are one of the companies that has that participates in unacknowledged special access programs that are built out of Palmdale, California, out of Plant 42. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, that there may be a connection here between Cesar Paez and what's being built at Plant 42, that he may have seen some of this stuff. He may have worked on some of this stuff. And as you can see, he was an advanced concepts analyst with Northrop Grumman. So he would be exactly the sort of person who would have been involved in some of these special access programs dealing with anti-gravity technologies, electromagnetic propulsion systems that were being built out of places like Plant 42 on behalf of the Air Force by Northrop Grumman. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So after he works with Northrop Grumman for a few years, then he moves over and begins working with the Naval Air War Center Aircraft Division. So now he moves from Northrop, which does contracts for the Air Force, for the Navy, but now he's working directly for the Navy. And currently he's working with the Strategic Systems Programs, the Department of the Navy. And you know, the acronym for that, SSP, I thought that's quite interesting. I mean, probably coincidental, but maybe not. SSP, because as many of you know, I've been doing a lot of work since 2015 on SSPs, secret space programs. So quite interesting that you have that acronym. But anyway, so that tells you a little bit about Salvador Paez. So as I mentioned, he was working with Northrop Grumman on advanced concepts design. And in 2004, he applied for a patent on behalf of Northrop Grumman. And so here you have on the right-hand side, it tells you, this you can find on Google. You have the patent number. Tells you the inventor. This is the person who invented the patent. And it tells you the assignee. So it tells you that it's Northrop Grumman Systems Corporation. So this is basically telling us that Salvador Paez invented this and that Northrop Grumman is assigned all rights to this patent. So yeah, this was something that Paez developed directly on behalf of Northrop Grumman. So even though he's listed as the inventor, the assignee gets to have, build it, use the license and so forth. It tells you worldwide application. It was applied for in the United States. Down here tells you the application process. So in July of 2004, the application was filed by Northrop Grumman. It was given priority. The patent then was assigned to Northrop Grumman, and then it was published in 2006, January, was published by Northrop Grumman. So that means it's basically listed, and that's why we can see it. If it wasn't published by Northrop, if there is an option when you file for a patent, the inventor has an option where they can choose to have the patent published or not. If they choose to not have it published, that means that inventor and the assignee could basically go forward with patent protection, but others don't know about it. So it prevents others from basically ripping off your patent, but there's a downside to that, because you might not be able to kind of like go out and get as many, grant as many licenses in the commercial sector, because the patent hasn't been published. Okay, so now, so that first patent application, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. That first application was published in 2004. Salvador Payés is working with Northrop Grumman at the time. And then at some point, I don't know the exact year, but Salvador Payés begins working for the Navy. And in 2015, he files for the first of 5 patent applications for the Navy. So this is the first one he's filed on behalf of the Navy. So here he's filed it. There's the patent number application. It tells you the inventor, tells you the current assignee, US Secretary of Navy. So this basically tells us that this is something that belongs to the Department of the Navy. So it's the Department of the Navy that owns this patent. People get confused often between the Department of the Navy and the Navy as a military service. The Department of the Navy actually runs 2 military services. It runs the Navy, the US Navy, and the US Marine Corps. But the Department of the Navy is the kind of administrative body that runs both of those military branches. And the Secretary of the Navy is in charge of both the US Navy and the US Marine Corps. So the Department of the Navy basically owns this patent. So it was filed in 2015 by the Secretary of the Navy. It was given priority in July of 2015. It was assigned to the Navy. Then it was published and the application was granted. So in the earlier one, the patent application was also granted. So here, the Navy application was granted in 2018 in November. And there's a good reason for why there was such a delay. You can see 2015, the application was filed. The patent was granted in 2018, more than 3 years later. And it was published in 2017. So that's when the public could see for the first time Salvador Payés's patent application. So this application is for an electromagnetic field generator, a method to generate an electric field. And so there you have the abstract. And rather than reading out the abstract, I have a description or a summary of it, but you could go and read the abstract yourself if you're more technically minded and can understand that. But to kind of like to simplify it down, because I know a lot of you are not engineers. I'm not an engineer. I'm a political scientist, so I do appreciate it when you have engineers summarizing these complex patent abstracts. So here you have Brett Tingley from the Drive, and the Drive is a great resource if you want to understand these patent applications that Salvador Payés has put together. Just go to the Drive, which is an online site, and they've got a number of articles, and they do a really great job in just explaining this in layman's terms is what's going on. So in this patent application, in the patent for the high energy electromagnetic field generator, the technology is described as being able to create what is essentially a force field straight out of science fiction, one that could generate an impenetrable defensive shield to sea and land, as well as space-based military and civilian assets, protecting these assets from such threats as anti-ship ballistic missiles, radar evading cruise missiles, top attack for main battle tanks, land and sea-based systems, as well as countering the effects of solar-induced coronal mass ejections or defending critical military satellites in an ASAT, that's anti-satellite role, space-based system. So this is really incredible. This patent technology, this patent application truly is, you know, for many in the public sector that maybe have not been looking at some of the kind of secret space program material, you know, when you have this kind of patent application for this high energy electromagnetic field generator, it truly is quite incredible. And, you know, you can protect, by generating this electromagnetic field, you know, this impenetrable shield, you can protect a lot of things. You can protect cities, you can protect regions, top secret facilities, and if it's powerful enough, even an entire region or a country from any kind of attack or coronal mass ejection. I mean, that's a big one, because you know, people are very worried about, well, what happens with the sun? You know, people have been talking about massive solar flares, coronal mass ejections, even a solar burst, a massive solar burst, a mini nova. Well, you know, could this kind of shield protect you from that? Well, for those of you that maybe thought this sounded familiar, it is, because this is something that Nikola Tesla was talking about. Well, nearly during the 1930s. So we're talking about 80 years ago. Nikola Tesla was talking about developing this kind of electromagnetic shield that could protect regions or cities or protect facilities from missiles, from bombs, from any kind of attack. So he was talking about this in the 1930s. At the time, of course, you know, the public reaction to Nikola Tesla was that, you know, he was a mad scientist wanting to kind of come up with all these electromagnetic weapons, but the US military was very aware of the power of these inventions. And as I mentioned, you know, after Nikola's death in 1943, John Trump was actually asked to review some of these inventions to see which ones you know, needed to be withheld from the public arena, because they didn't, the Air Force and the Navy didn't want this kind of technology being released into the public sector. So this is something that during Nikola Tesla's time was something that was hypothesized to be possible. The Army, the Navy looked at this very closely, and now we're being told from this patent application that this is feasible. You can actually build this. So here we are. So that patent application, that was 2015. So we're told that this kind of technology that was first envisaged back in the 1930s is possible. So that's something I think to keep in mind. Okay, so when did the Navy start to develop this? Anytime. We know that 1943, you had the Philadelphia experiment. And you know that it was the USS Eldridge, where they basically outfitted it with a lot of capacitors, an electromagnetic power supply to generate an electric field, a powerful electromagnetic field around that craft to generate some kind of defense from radar. But in fact, it turned into something else. And of course, those of you who have watched the movie or maybe have read any books concerning the Philadelphia experiment know that it turned out very badly. Because what it did was, when you generated this electromagnetic shield, it actually moved the Eldridge in time and space. And then when it came back, a lot of the servicemen were suffering severe problems, and some of them were actually moved. Some of the people were actually merged with the hull of the ship or with the walls of the ship. That as you move space-time through generating powerful electromagnetic shields, it's very dangerous. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could actually have biological life being merged with, say, metals and the hull of the ship and so forth. And so the Navy didn't know at the time how to use this technology, and so the Navy stopped doing it. So that was in 1943. But we know that eventually the Navy began to develop this technology because, and that's one of the unwritten rules of any kind of technology that's declassified, is that any technology that is declassified by any of the military service, or in the case of this, where a patent has been issued, has been filed on behalf of the Navy concerning a kind of advanced technology like a high energy electromagnetic field generator, that there is at least a 30-year time lag. So in other words, if the Navy released that patent, applied for that patent in 2015, then you can be pretty sure that at least in 1985 that the Navy had operationalized that high energy electromagnetic field generator, that it was using it. And in fact, for those of you that have been following my Secret Space Program book series, you're aware that I have talked about the Navy in the early 1980s deploying the Solar Warden program. And so that would actually be very consistent with this kind of technology coming online back then. So that meant that, you know, if you take 1943 with the Philadelphia experiment as the time when the Navy began experimenting with these kinds of huge electromagnetic fields that would be generated around a ship, that by sometime by the 80s, I think really it was by the 70s that the Navy perfected this kind of technology. So by the 70s and the 80s, the Navy had perfected this and was deploying it on its classified spacecraft. And then it was something that we now see being released through the patent office. So that tells us a little bit about the history of these kinds of electromagnetic fields being used for generating a shield around whether it's a ship or a facility or even a city. So why did the Navy release this patent in 2015? This was the first one that PAS released on behalf of the Navy. So why did they do that? Well, I think one reason is we look at the development of hypersonic missiles. So here you have the Zircon cruise missile that was first tested in 2015, and it was deployed in 2017. So in 2015, the Russians started to develop a cruise missile that is capable of hypersonic speed. So, you know, what does this mean? So here you have, so the Zircon missile, it's a missile capable of traveling up to 6 times the speed of sound, twice as fast as Navy missiles designed to shoot it down. Projectiles can be armed with warheads ranging from high explosive to nuclear. So this can be high explosive or nuclear. Scramjet technology allows fuel to burn at hypersonic speeds. So this hypersonic cruise missile basically can travel 6 times the speed of sound. So what we're talking about, roughly around 5,000 miles an hour. So what's that? 8,000 kilometers per hour. And so twice the speed of the Navy's best anti-missile missile systems. So that means that the Navy can't shoot these things down. So the Russians are developing them. China's also developing hypersonic missiles. And in 2015, the Navy realizes that eventually their entire fleet of ships can be shot down or can be destroyed by these hypersonic missiles that the Russians are developing, and the Chinese are not too far behind. And so I don't think it's coincidental that that this patent application was launched in 2015. because the writing is on the wall. Every ship in the US Navy can be shot down by these things, including, and this is the important one, including the aircraft carriers. And that's really important because, you know, the Navy is very, very protective when it comes to its aircraft carriers. So the Navy knows that the Zircon missile is first tested in 2015, and it's only a matter of time before the Russians are going to start deploying these things. And the Chinese are not too far behind. So, the first Zircon missiles, the first Zircon cruise missiles are deployed by Russia in 2017. So, coincidentally, at the beginning of 2017, January 2017, US aircraft carriers secretly they're all being recalled. For the first time since World War II, all US aircraft carriers have been called back to port. And in January 2017, and they're all called back to port for retrofitting. What are they being retrofitted with? In January of 2017. And so there's an article I wrote. I wrote an article for my website, exopolitics.org, where I talk about this. Obama recalls all aircraft carriers setting up, that's an article that appeared. I don't know the source of that article, but basically that article was speculating that all aircraft carriers were recalled because they were setting up the US for an attack. And it talks about all 10 US Navy aircraft carriers from the Middle East. Okay, so all the 10 Navy aircraft carrier battle groups are all in port, all being retrofitted. And for the first time in living memory, there were not going to be any aircraft carriers stationed anywhere around the world. So they're all being recalled. Whoops, sorry. So why are they being recalled? And on my website, I actually had an article. You'll have to go to my website to get the article for that. But basically, my website talks about the possibility that what was really happening was that the Navy recalled all its aircraft carriers because it was retrofitting them with these high energy electromagnetic field generators so that you could actually build a shield around that aircraft carriers as a defense mechanism against these Zircon missiles and other hypersonic missiles that were being developed by Russia and China that made all US aircraft carrier battle groups vulnerable because none of their best missile systems could shoot down these ballistic missiles. So none of the Navy's missiles could shoot these down. So they needed one of these high energy electromagnetic fields that could be generated around the aircraft carriers. So that is why I believe the aircraft carriers have been recalled. And, you know, if people are skeptical and say, well, you know, how could they do this secretly? Well, you have to go back to 1943 when the Navy basically introduced a whole lot of electrical equipment to generate a high energy electromagnetic field around that craft. And of course, they hadn't mastered technology. There were these problems. But with all of the aircraft carriers that the Navy has in its possession now, all the Nimitz class carriers are all nuclear powered. And their nuclear power can run for up to 20 years. And so they have a sufficient power supply. And if they attach this high energy electromagnetic field generator to the power supply, or to the power being supplied by their nuclear fission engines, then you can generate one of these shields. So that's how the Navy would do it. And so rather than relying on anti-missile missiles to shoot down these Zircon hypersonic weapons, you generate one of these things. So that's what the Navy was really doing. Okay, so that patent was granted in November of 2018. It went through a process, but eventually it was granted. And why was that granted? I think there was a firm national security reason for granting that, because this was necessary for the Navy to equip its aircraft carriers. So now we get to the second Navy patent filed in 2016, and this concerns a hybrid aerospace underwater craft. And so we see this patent. This was filed in April of 2016. Down here you can see it. The application was filed by the US Secretary of the Navy. Again, Salvador Paez was the inventor, and he filed it on behalf of the US Secretary of the Navy. So it was assigned to the Department of the Navy in April 2016. It was published in November of 2017, and eventually published in December of 2018. So this is only a few months after the granting of the high energy electromagnetic field generator. If you look at that, that was granted in November, 20th of November 2018. And this high energy electromagnetic field generator was granted only on December 4th. So it's 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later. So what happened, you know, why were these two patents granted around the same time? So the first patent we know that dealt with this electromagnetic shield, or kind of Tesla shield. This patent is dealing with something a little different. Again, Brett Tingley summarizes what this patent does for us, again from the drive, and this is what he says. So the concept is fairly simple. Although the engineering is required to make it a reality is anything but, all matter contains energy on the quantum level. By theoretically creating its own incredibly dense and polarized energy field, the hybrid craft is claimed to be able to create a quantum vacuum around itself, which allows it to repel any air or water molecules with which it interacts. Thus, the craft can essentially ignore aerodynamic or hydrodynamic forces, or so it is claimed in the patent. So this is really quite important, because it's telling us that this craft is utilizing a let me see if I've got a better diagram for you. Okay, so this craft is utilizing a kind of cavity. So you have like the outer hull and the inner hull around this craft. This is the hybrid aerospace underwater craft, and notice the triangle shape. Whoops. Okay, so you notice the triangle shape. So, but here you have like the outer hull or the outer shell and the inner shell, and in there's a cavity, and there's a microwave emitter inside of that cavity, and it resonates, or it sends out a microwave, and it pulses it at a particular frequency. So you kind of like create a standing wave in there, and as it does, it generates a quantum vacuum outside of the craft. So if you think about that, if you have like the front of this craft generating this quantum vacuum bubble around it, and not the back, right? So just the front of the craft has this. What happens is that if this is moving through the water, for example, under the ocean, so that means that this craft could move underwater, and all particles in front of that craft are basically moved because of the electromagnetic shield that is being generated. So in a way, the principle in this patent is very similar to the patent, to the principles for this patent. Because in this patent, the first patent, you're generating electromagnetic field generator, sorry, an electromagnetic field around an entire body or a location. Here, you're generating an electromagnetic field or quantum vacuum around or in front of, immediately in front of a craft. And you need to have a microwave emitter. And so you're generating that. And so it generates this quantum vacuum bubble. And so it's able to move through the air, or sorry, able to move through the water or through the air by generating a quantum bubble in front of it. So all water particles or air particles behind it, sorry, or in front of it, are removed, but the water pressure and the air pressure from behind it continues. It's still there. So effectively what you have is not only do you have a quantum vacuum, which could in theory protect you from oncoming particles, whether it's water, air, or even some sort of metal or debris or an attack or something. So in a sense, it's similar in principle to the magnetic shield that was described in the first patent. In this second patent, it could also be used as a propulsion system, because the back of the craft doesn't have that same kind of cavity generating a quantum vacuum around it. And so the whole thing is moved forward from the air pressure or from the water pressure from behind it. So you actually can have the craft moving really, really quickly without meeting any resistance from air or water in front of it. So this is the hybrid aerospace underwater craft, and it's very important because it incorporates some of the other patents, or all the other patents that Paes discussed are all incorporated in this hybrid aerospace underwater craft. So basically, I'm going to be discussing 5 patents that Paes has issued or had applied patents for on behalf of the Navy, and they all are involved with this hybrid aerospace underwater craft. So a patent application for all of the patents, and I'll be talking more about this hybrid aerospace craft soon. All of the patents are published without the request not to publish item being checked. I mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to show you the actual option that you have on the patent application. And there you have the request not to publish. And Brett Tigley and Tyler Rogaway from the Drive summarized what this meant. Basically, they said, quote, "If the Navy indeed wanted to keep this technology out of the hands of others, it's curious that they would choose to make the patent public. Maybe the Navy is signaling to its adversaries that it too is aware of this revolutionary capability and to whom it belongs," end quote. So, you can kind of read a lot into that, but basically, I think one of the things that can be read is that earlier on I mentioned that Russia and China are developing these hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles that can be used as anti-ship missiles, and that the Navy has no defense against them. I think you could look at this and say, okay, the Navy wants the Russians, wants the Chinese to know that, hey, this is what we've developed, and so this is what you're up against. So maybe that's what they're signaling, and they want them to know, because corporate contractors like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, like Boeing, they are building the craft that use these technologies, they're retrofitting the Navy aircraft carriers, like Northrop Grumman is responsible for a lot of the Navy's aircraft carrier weapon systems, and so Northrop Grumman would also be involved in that. So the Navy knows, is wanting to signal to other countries that yeah, this technology has been developed. We're using it, and we're deploying it, and they also want the public to know. So you know, this is important because it means that the Navy sees that it's in the national interest to make this technology public. Very important. That's very important because, as I mentioned earlier, there are over 5,800 patent applications that have been not released or not allowed to be published and not allowed to be granted because of national security orders being issued by one entity or another. Here the Navy is actually wanting this technology, wanting these patents to be revealed because they want their adversaries to know that the Navy has developed this stuff. They want the Chinese and the Russians to know that, that their aircraft carriers have a high energy electromagnetic field generators around them so that their cruise missiles are useless. They want them to know because they don't want the Russians or the Chinese to kind of get too cocky, too confident in their hypersonic weapons, because that could be actually a threat to national security. So here you actually have the argument being used the other way. You want these technology, these inventions to be published. So you know, this is why these patents are so important. So this second patent that Pais applied for in 2017, it's rejected by the patent examiner. So the rejection, that happens sometime after the patent application was issued, was made. So we're talking about 2017. Sometime early in 2017, the patent application is issued, and the examiner rejects it. And his rejection is, his rejection was basically that this technology was not feasible, that this high frequency, this hybrid aerospace underwater craft couldn't operate because there's no known power supply for it. We don't know of anything that could power this kind of quantum vacuum that would be created in front of the craft. So you have the craft and you have the quantum vacuum bubble that would be in front of the craft, that according to the patent examiner, there was no known power supply to generate such a thing. So Dr. Pais, his invention is rejected because as far as the patent examiner is concerned, there's no power supply for this. So it's not feasible. So he rejects the patent application. So because this is a Navy initiative, this isn't just one rogue inventor. The Navy actually had the Chief Technology Officer for the Naval Aviation Enterprise, which is a high-end Navy think tank working on their most advanced aerospace concepts. His name is Dr. James Shee. Respond to the patent examiner who had rejected it. And this is unprecedented because typically what happens is a patent application can be rejected, and the examiner says, well, I don't like the way, I don't think your patent application is feasible because you haven't really explained how it's going to operate. And the inventor replies and says, oh, well, it's feasible because of, you know, you realign things in a certain way. And the patent examiner and the patent the inventor have a to and fro, and eventually the patent examiner might say, oh, okay, you've explained it, so I'll grant the patent and it goes forward. So that's often what happens. Sometimes the patent examiner is convinced by the inventor, or the inventor doesn't give a persuasive case, and the rejection stands. Well, in this case, what's different is that it wasn't just the inventor that replied, it was this chief technical officer of the Navy. Unprecedented. That just does not happen. This is why these patents are so important, because it just doesn't happen that you actually have another entity within the US Navy, a very important entity like the Naval Aviation Enterprise, and its chief technology officer intervening on behalf of someone working with another branch of the Navy. And here Dr. Paez was working with the Naval Air War Center, the aircraft division. So this is what he said. In a letter that was dated, 11 December 2017, Dr. Paez said, the full letter is available online, but he says, and this is all I'm quoting, his second point too, he says, Dr. Paez is currently funded by the Naval Air War Center aircraft division to design a test article instrumentation to demonstrate the experimental feasibility of achieving high electromagnetic field energy and flux values. So he's saying that this kind of device, is actually being experimented on at the Naval Air War Center, and that Paez is working on generating the electromagnetic flux, that is the kind of flux or the microwave being pulsed in this cavity that could generate the quantum vacuum flux. So he's saying, yes, this is real, this is happening. And she goes on, point 3, he says, if successful, the realization of this result demonstrates that this patent documents the future state of the possible and moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamic systems to field-induced propulsion-based hybrid aerospace undersea craft. Right there, you have a shot across the bow of the fossil fuel industry. Moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamic systems. So this is telling us that turbojets, that kind of rocket propulsion systems, any kind of liquid fuel propulsion system, that's redundant. That generating these electromagnetic fluxes, or these electromagnetic fields, and fluxing them, pulsing them in a certain way, you can actually develop quantum vacuum bubbles. And that this is a form of propulsion that's far more efficient and powerful than anything that can be done by a rocket or kind of like a turbine, turbine jets, or kind of any kind of liquid fuel propulsion system. So this is revolutionary. This is a revolutionary state. And then he says, based on these initial findings, I would assert this will become a reality. Very important statement. This will become a reality. He's telling the patent examiner that you've got to grant this patent because it's going to become a reality. And then he throws in the kicker. China is already investing significantly in this area, and I would prefer we hold the patent as opposed to paying forevermore to use this revolutionary technology. So the Navy is developing these electromagnetic field technologies that can be used for propulsion and can be used for other things like protecting an installation or a ship or a city using electromagnetic fields, and that China is also doing similar work. And if the patent examiner doesn't grant this patent to PAIS and to the Navy, that the Navy will be paying a lot of patents, will be paying royalties to the Chinese, who, in all likelihood, basically stole or did industrial espionage to steal these patents from the Navy in the first place. So that's a very powerful argument, and that tells us why the Navy, why the patent was granted to PAIS in what was it, December 10 or early December 2018, and why that was done almost simultaneously with the granting of the patent for the high energy electromagnetic field generator that was granted in November, only 2 weeks earlier of 2017. Because the patent examiner or examiners were convinced from the Navy that these patent applications were feasible, and that the Navy needed these to signal to China that the Navy has been developing these technologies, and that China was also developing them, and that if they didn't make them public, that China would come out with their own patents, international patents, and the US companies would be paying royalties to China, because China could have gone forward with patent applications internationally or in the United States.